to hand over to Arno and ask him if he could introduce himself and then get going. So thank you very much, Arno.
Yeah, thanks, Jan, for the presentation, and thanks for the invitation. Okay, I'm economic professor to UCA, and right now I'm a visiting professor in Montreal, Canada, so to work on degrowth and post-growth systems. I think last year when you organized this kind of event, Small is Beautiful, I was just thinking to how I could use systems thinking tools to really understand all the chapters of Schumacher and try to fix some leverage points, some typing points in the books. And, in 1 year, I just go chapter after chapter and try to understand what are the driving force of the book. And do we have everything today understand from Schumacher, or do we need to go deeper and deeper, and maybe system thinking can be useful? So this is just a draft. I keep working on the chapter, keep improving. I will show you system thinking tools. I just want to show you the book, the English book we get here in 1973, and the translation in French, because we have to wait 5 years. This book was translated in 1978. So we still have Small is Beautiful, but we have a small title, means how to build a human society with into the limits. So, and I think it's quite interesting to define how we can define the society, a human society here today. So what I propose to you is just make an overview or system thinking tools, the way we just developed from today. I think since maybe the 2002, we start to improve all the tools and we start to develop some steps to really understand how to start with system thinking and go to system dynamics, because it's possible to model. And I will show you that in some chapter from Schumacher, there is some quantitative design of what he tried to do. I think many people are familiar with system thinking and system dynamics, but I think we need some time to really focus on what we develop, what we improve in 25 years. When you start to work on system, you start to map a system. I think everyone says that, okay, you have to find the element, the interaction, the objective, the limits of the system. It means you have to define all of this at the beginnings, and sometimes we use the bull eyes to really understand, oh, what are the driver of the system? What are the endogenous variables, exogenous variables? What do you put away from the system we study? I think we really focus on element and interaction, and sometimes on limits, but sometimes we forgot objectives. And I think it's really important to really define which objectives we use to define a system. I will try to explain this, but it means if the objective is a post-growth system or degrowth system, you cannot use an economic system which just have an objective of growth system. So it means you have to reorganize the system to really have the objective at the end. And I think it's very important. You cannot use the same words to have the same objectives. You have to do and be very careful. The second step, I think it's for experience, because when I start like an economist to work on system thinking, I was following the step to say, okay, I'm design a CLD, a causal diagrams, and after I go to the stock and flow diagrams. The problem with the economists, it's we always talk about flows and we forgot the stocks. So that means the second step, we have to define the stocks. It's very short, detailed framework, but we have to understand what are the stock, what are the flow, very easy way. It's not a quantitative design. You just really understand the way the system work. And after, you start to develop the feedback loops, reinforcing one, negative one, balancing one, the time delay, principle of non-linearity, because there is sometimes non-linearity in the system, the question between system behavior and pattern structures, how you define the pattern of the behavior of the system. And so we start to understand there is some patterns we are really familiar, like a growth system, like the objective system. could be a shape growth, could be oscillation, could be overshoot. But for the economists, it's very hard to imagine what could be collapse. If you check the models of the economists, there is no collapse. So I think it's really interesting to check this and to see how we can introduce this kind of hypothesis, these structures in the models and try to understand. When we do all this step, I think we are able to design these closed diagrams. And for me, it's really important to design what are the driving force of the system and how you can involve people to really understand the driving force, what we call participatory system dynamics modeling. You know, how you put stakeholder with you and understand the system. When you do this, I think you're coming back to the big problem with system thinking, its complexity. And sometimes you talk about forest thinking, you know, how to be able to design the complexity. Because I just coming back to mapping a system. Most of the time, you define the limits at the beginning, but you know, as I know, when you start to design a CLD, you try to improve the limits and you push the limit away because sometimes you go to more detail in CLD and the limit at the beginning are not the limit at the end. So you have to be very careful of the CLD you design. The other step is correlation and causality. You know, that is a big deal in a system. Um, and for the economist, most of the time we talk more about correlation than causality. We get through the leverage point, I mean, how you intervene in a system. And what I like today, it's not leverage point, but how leverage point can become a typing point. And I think it's really interesting how the climate science just improves the system thinking design, because typing point means, once again, there is no linearity in a system. The frequency can be very high, and there is no continuity in the system. I mean, the system change. And I think it's really good to understand that in social system or economic system, typing points can help you to understand, okay, the state of the system, it's not the same than before. So we change the system. The archetype is someone that's coming back all the time and regularly we can understand how it's work. And you say, if I do this, it just to explain that some people just need system thinking just for qualitative design. They don't need to quantitative design. They just want to understand what is the mental models. But if we want to start to have this quantitative design, we must build these token flow diagrams, go through quantitative modeling, and which could be for an expert in system dynamics, use simulation, calibration, and validation. I use this step because when I read Schumacher, Small is Beautiful, it helped me a lot to really understand at this moment in 73, 75, how people was really pursued that quantitative modeling could be the solution or not. And I would like to explain you why, if I use this kind of step, I use this 15 steps, it's really interesting to understand all the value of small is beautiful and why there is some limits at the beginning when you read the book and why there is some value you can just catch if you go deeper in this system. So I will try to use most of the time every step to really understand why Schumacher improved the system tools and why it's useful to really understand every chapters of Schumacher's book. Okay, just one, maybe two comments before to start. When you start to read the book, you start really to understand the objectives of the book of Schumacher's. The objective is quite large. It means how we can improve human happiness, well-being, culture, peace, and harmony. I think it's quite interesting how a book cannot focus on growth or economic growth or growth of production and try to fix a kind of quest, which is not an economic quest, and just to explain that if we try to get the quest of higher rate of growth production, it's a lost cause. And if you read the chapter 8 called Research for Industry, you start to really understand how Schumacher designed the book and what is useful for him to prove on that. I just used two sentences that he just produced in the chapter 8. And first sentence makes you understand how he's designed the industrial system. He just explained that the system used 40% of world primary resource to supply less than 6% of the world population. And when Schumacher explained this, he just explained what is United States. They are the big country at that time using energy, using natural resource. And using this example, he really believes that the system going to fail, just to fail because it's not possible to reach a higher rate of growth of production all the time. We know this, there is some world finite resource. So not the conclusion for him, but if you focus on the industrial system, you start to understand that the system consumes everything it can consume. And so we cannot go so far with such a system. And at this moment, Schumacher used limit to growth. And he explained that, yeah, read this book, Limit to Growth. He explained to you what are the limits of the system. And it's not possible to have this economic growth all the time. So the first comments for me for the book is just to say we have to improve the objective of the system. It's not only looking for economic growth. We must find a way to put a human visage on the system. And for him, well-being, cultures, peace, and harmony, and I could add education. It's very important in the system. If you just read the CLD, it's not a CLD, it's kind of understanding of systems thinking tools to really understand the system. I think it's quite interesting to see how and what means efficiency in such a system. If you start with industrial production of USA, you start to really understand that when you speak about or when you talk about production, you are mainly focused on efficiency. This is the objective, get more and more efficiency. But at the same time, you start to understand that efficiency doesn't mean happiness, doesn't mean peace or harmony. Efficiency is just a technical language to explain to you that your production is higher and higher every time. But behind efficiency, you have a stock of raw materials, which is a global one, a world one, and the importation of world primary resource that you need to produce more and more. So I would say the first example, which really interesting to understand and make a comments on small is beautiful, it's to say, if you let a country like USA to have so much consumption, you need to produce more and more. And even if this country have resource, they have not enough resource, they have to import. And importation is a flows which reduce the stock of raw materials in the world, which is not really good for the human happiness in the world. So first comment, yes, limit to growth is helpful, and there is a connection between small is beautiful and limit to growth. Now, let me go to the second comment, which is not the same result. If you observe all the chapter of Schumacher, it's really designing around qualitative design of the system, and he's very suspicious about quantitative modeling techniques, especially simulation. If you just go to chapter 8, he has some comments on limit to growth. And if you check the comments, you fail something. First comment for him, failure about methods. Computer calculation is not good. And he don't believe we can use computers to imagine the futures of human society. The second comment, it's a big critic about limit to growth. It's, oh, you understand the limits of the system, but you forgot energy. And he really believed that energy don't have the place that it should be in the book. I just address here two comments, which is always in chapter 8. The first one, it's what he explained about MIT group and the solution calculations they use. And I really like the middle of the sentence when he said, it requires a study of large number of commodities, of trend, feedback loop, system dynamics, and so on, to come to the conclusion that time is short. Maybe it was useful to employ a computer for obtaining results which any intelligent person can reach with the help of a few calculations on the back of an envelope. because the modern world believes in computer and mass of fact. I think it's quite interesting to just observe the comments of Schumacher to say, oh, but it's very easy to see the limit to growth. You don't need a computer. You can just have some roof on raft numbers on energy, and you can find a solution. And the comments about MIT, it's great about energy. And I think I agree with him. Energy does not have the place that should be in the book. So he just asked to the MIT, you should more concentrate it on the availability of energy because the big question is energy. So it's two critics, but for me, it's two critics really to develop an argument to say, oh, I'm very suspicious about system dynamics. I'm very suspicious about the way to make simulation with computer. And at the same time, I like the answer he's making in the chapter 8. I prefer to base myself on information coming from the oil people themselves. What I propose to make now is not a prediction, but simple an exploration calculation, what I call a feasibility study. I try to remember that Schumacher was the chief economic advisor to the British National Coal Board. So he knows these people. He knows how to talk with them and ask information, which is quite interesting. And in the book, Small is Beautiful, Schumacher take an argument to explain uh, you are focused on the oil resource, but it's not a problem. The problem is it's coal. Because if we have a penury or if we have no more oil petroleum, we can use coal and we can still use coal. And I think it's really great understanding of the mixed energy today. It's not to say we don't need something because for any reason, we have to understand the world need an energy mix. And just we have to be very careful about the flow and the stock inside the system. So I show you how the first comments of the Schumacher book and the second one comments change the system because for Schumacher, the solution is the coal production, not the oil energy. He knows there is a penury scarcity of oil. So he just asked to the people, be careful, just have a look on the coal. It's very important for the futures. So these two comments helped me to really understand how we can be useful and how we can use system thinking and how we can be very suspicious about quantitative design and system dynamics. Now, I take some time to explain these two comments because for me it's great if I understand the thoughts of Schumacher. Now, let's go to the book and I would like to have some, not comments, but try to explain to you how I design the book to really understand how I can use system tools. If you just take the contents of the book, you have the first part, what we call the modern world, what I call the driving force of the system. If you take the chapter, it means you start to understand what are for him the big driver if you want to understand the system. The second part, it's a resource. I call them leverage point. How you can change, how you can intervene in the system. Education, it's a way to intervene. Use of land, nuclear energy, it's for him the way to intervene in the system. And the third word, maybe we could have some critical issue here. I call this a typing point. Means how you can release the system because some leverage points are very simple to change, but they don't change the system. Now, what he proposes in the third part, it's really how you can change the system. And for example, when you talk about development, he critiques the economist. And just to explain them, development, it's not only economics. You need to develop more something, and typing point could be something to change. So for me, and for example, the third word, it means there is no continuity in a system. You have to change a system. And to change a system, you have to just change the way to define development, employment, the way to define ownership. Do we need ownership in a system? And if you start to design to say, oh, there is no ownership, you just start to design and say, oh, the private property, it's a big problem in the system. So if we change a system, we have to talk about this. So what I propose to you is not an overview of all the chapters. I keep it boring, but just take few chapters to explain to you why I think it's quite interesting to get this challenge inside this three-part. First one, it's how we can design the driving force of the system and what are the driving force in the book Small is Beautiful. I think the hard time for Schumacher, it's really to make some connection between this driving force because there is sometimes prosperity, there is sometimes peace, there is sometimes economics, there is sometimes conflict, there is sometimes unlimited needs, technology, natural resource. So we need to really understand how the system is reinforcing and how the system is balancing because Schumacher developed some argument to map the complexity of the world. I think the nice reinforcing loops that very simple for him, it's a prosperity and peace. You start to really understand if you check the history, more you get prosperity, more you create some peace, and sometimes you avoid some conflict, north, south. Why? Because some country from the north with prosperity can import, export few things, and it just brings some prosperity and some peace in this conflict. But at the same time, he has an argument to say, oh, if we check prosperity, we just develop a specific cult of greed and envy. Envy means unlimited needs. We don't have limits for the needs. And we believe that technology is helpful to get over the limits. It cannot overshoot of the system. And when you start to develop technology, you start to develop alienation. And at the same time, alienation reinforces prosperity because you believe that the only goal of the system is prosperity. At the same time, when you start to imagine prosperity and you start to get the cult of envy, you start to really understand that you need some natural resource to get this prosperity. And you see you have this design of a new loops inside the system because when you use natural resource, you produce pollution, and the pollution is not really good for the quality of life. And the second one, it's you start to create specific conflict, not because between North and South, but between North and North countries, because the price of natural resource get higher and higher, and there is some conflict for the land, for the resource in the world. So all the world countries are in conflict to get this resource, and this is just reduce the peace in the world because for this conflict. I will show you after, but it's quite interesting to see when you need some natural resource, you need to extract this resource from somewhere. So you need to find the land to do it. And you start to become in a colonialism system when capitalism need to be more to South country to get the natural resource. So for me, it's a really good argument to explain the complexity of the world, which is not simple way of prosperity, but start to understand different driving force in the system. And I think it's quite interesting to get through this to really understand how you can reinforce this system or sometimes you're balancing the system. I would like to start with what Schumacher called the misunderstood of production. I think it's quite really interesting because at this time, there is not so much economists who really focus on production. I try to remind you that most of people was thinking that production was down. Everything, every no was what was production. And so the debate was not on production, but on something else. For example, for the economist, the big debate was the equilibrium of the system, and they tried to find a scientific method to do it. I still there here in the driving force. So it means for Schumacher production, he's the big driving force. And I really like the way he defined what the object to design. He explained one of the most fateful error of age is to believe that the problem of production have been solved. Not only is the belief firmly held by people remote for production and therefore professionally maintained with the fact. And when you start to really understand every argument that Schumacher used, the big argument, it's very simple. Production is just the way, it's just a behavior of man to control natures. And for him, it's quite simple. This is a Western attitude of man toward nature, what he calls the process of Westernization. When you start to design the production like this, Schumacher used two arguments to explain the domination. The first one, it's we get the technology, we get the scientific power. So it's very simple to use this power to get in advance in production. What we could say, this is the opposition between anthropocentrism and ecocentrism. We have a system really focused on the activity of the man in the world. And the second one, I think it's an argument from the theory. Schumacher just explained that the economist didn't really understand the connection between incomes and capital. I mean, between flows and stock. I think it's quite really interesting because we have this big issue in the history of economic thought between Smith, Ricardo, and Jean-Baptiste Say, who was aware about the distinction between revenue and capital. But the problem is, if you're talking about natural capitals, there is no flows. How you can create these flows and how you can develop these flows. And so I try to explain the Schumacher development and ideas in the diagrams you have in the right side. Why? Because if you are not able to develop this kind of flows of income for the natural resource, it's just because there is a misunderstood between what is the stock of natural resource. If you follow the history of economic thought, we always said that there is a scarcity of resource, okay? And we explain the world has a scarcity, and economics have to explain to you how to use it, the scarcity of resource, how to organize a system. But I think we forgot one thing. It's when you start to focus on natural resource, it's free at the beginning, it's abundance, and it's a long-term process. If you check what's happened for the coal, for the oil, it's a long, long time process to get this resource. Now, what's happened? At the first step, we start to extract. We give a cost to natural resource. We are in a medium terms. We extract, we need to product. So we define a cost-benefit analysis. We are in the short terms. And what's happened at the end? The consumption. We get a value in exchange and sometimes a value in use. We still are in the short term. So the economists just define a price, a market, a scarcity for natural resource, but they forgot that natural resource has no incomes at the end. And so if you compare and take few arguments, for example, if you take few arguments from Schumacher at that moment, you can just really understand what are the flow, what are the flow in and flow out to define the stock. If you define natural capital, you have a growth with core regeneration. You means nothing the nature do by himself. You can harvest, it's outflows, and that's it. There is no really income to just define. If you start to define the physical capital, could be the machine or whatever, you start to invest, you are obsolescence, but what you have to really understand is the physical capital has an objective, production. So you start to disconnect the physical capital to the flows of production. It means, oh, we are able to produce, and we produce because we get some revenue. And we get some revenue because the cost of capital, the marginal cost, it's under the profit we can get. So the system at the end have no connection with even the physical capital. It's just the flows of production and flows of sale and consumption. And if you follow the design, it's now that the big driver is not anymore production. It's consumption. It's if you consume more and more, you produce and you get some profit. So we start to change the driving force. No more production, but consumption start to be the next one. So I think it's a big concern about Schumacher, about the value in use and the value in exchange. And this debate is really interesting for really understanding how production is still a problem. And we have to get more investigation on this driving force. Let me now go to the leverage point. I think when you read the first chapter introducing a leverage point, it's education. We could have a discussion about is education a driving force or a leverage point? I'm not sure it's always a leverage point. It could be a driving force. But I think it's quite useful, and I want to explain why I designed the leverage point here, because in many chapters, not only an education chapter, but when you just focus on the aid development chapter, education, it's a very, very leverage point. I just want to explain why. In my system, I just explained to you how Schumacher designed the way to get education. And it's quite simple for him. It's really discussion from philosophy, from grammar, language, from thought in general. And what we believe, it's when you get ideas coming from observation, experience, and thought. And you have to develop this driving force to get more ideas. But when you get ideas, you can improve the ideas when you follow the humanities pathway. I mean, if you put some social inside, some political inside, some philosophical inside, you start to get a judgment, and you can imagine to have a world vision. What could be the good vision of the world? And what could be the good choice in a system? What I like in the system of education of, I think, Schumacher, it's what it is able to just divide education and transmission. I think transmission for him, it's really important. Not only transmission of ideas, transmission of value is very important, because for him, when you transmit values, you start to develop a kind of wisdom. And the wisdom, it just reinforces the way to make good choice. And if you reinforce the system more with transmission of ideas and transmission of know-how, you start to make the connection with techniques. So the ideas can just improve techniques, and we are able to really understand the connection between transmission of know-how with transmission of value. But there is one aspect of Schumacher which is interesting for the moral way, because the sentence I use from this chapter is very simple. It just explains that the modern way of life is starting to become complex. And if you want to really understand complexity, you have to become more and more educated. And I would like to come back at the end of this, because I think it's a good argument to say what makes education. Yes, one aspect of ideas, it's sometimes it start to develop a kind of alienation. You can develop some fanatism about ideas. You can develop some cynicism, some despair. And if you do this, you have some consequence of the world vision of the future. For example, if you have a cynicism, for example, if you use a behavior pattern of collapse, you start to be cynicism collapse. You start to develop this idea, and maybe your world vision start to be very different. About fanatism, Schumacher make a connection with science. It just explains you that, okay, with ideas, we can build science, but science needs hypotheses. And when you get alienation from ideas, you start to develop a very bad hypothesis and sometimes a very bad science. And you try to find some proof to develop this science. So we need hypotheses to have a good science, but at the same time, fanatism can use science in the wrong way. So we have to be very careful about this because it's a very complex system. Why I use education as a leverage point? Because when you read a chapter of Schumacher, at the middle of the chapter, you have what he calls the leading ideas. What are the ideas who change the system? And for me, we are now in a typing point. How to change really the system? Evolution. Evolution change the system. Competition, natural selection, change the system. So education start to change if you put competition in the system. You are not, you say you are not in leverage points. It's not something to change that you change the system. Now it's a radical change. If I put competition in education, you change the system. The history of class struggle, you change the system. The Freud interpretation, you change the system. And if you use relativism or positivism, you start to change the system because you change the ideas. So I really believe that the 6 leading ideas, like you said in the chapter, are really good opportunity to really understand how you change really the system, not how you can intervene in the system, but how you change the system. It's why I make the big difference between leverage point and typing points. And I will not use only the 12 leverage point from Donella Meadows, but try to use how really the system is changing because there is no continuity now. It's like you start at a specific state and you go to another state, and this new state has no really connection with the old one. So it's a question of reversibility and irreversibility. Can you come back to the initial state? I'm not sure. Okay, I take another one, another leverage point, just to explain everything, and I really hope we could have a discussion after. The second one, it's technology. So I think it's quite interesting because everyone know about what we call intermediate technology. This is a concept that Schumacher designed in the book, and he tried to push. I like the first sentence that he used to really develop technology. Strange to say, technology, I thought, of course, the product of human, tend to develop its own laws and own principles. These are very different from the human natures or of living nature in general. So I think it's quite interesting because for Schumacher, technology is not human. With technology, we get more and more away from human visage. And what he proposed is just to turn off the system, change it, and imagine what could be a technology with a human face. It's like here we can make the connection with education and put something new in the system. Why? I'm coming back to the connection in the last sentence when I said education, make some connection with science. Now we could use a connection with metaphysics because Schumacher makes these connections here and explain that if education is connected with metaphysics, it reinforces a system of knowledge. It means education start to be a stock of knowledge. And we need this stock of knowledge to create high tech or technology. The question here is the stock of knowledge in this chapter coming from education and science. It means if we improve science, if we develop education, we get more and more knowledge. And this knowledge, this stock of knowledge, start to develop high technology. I really understand in the system that we have to make a connection and a disconnection between high technology and technology. Because if you start to use science as we use today, science can be enough to create a technology. We can improve with many hypotheses, different technology in a system. But when you have a stock of knowledge, you have no limits to use the technology because you stock more and more knowledge, and everyone can use this stock to produce what they want in technology. High tech, it's really understanding in the system because more you develop high technology, more you need capital, investment. This is the difference between technology and high technology. If you want to push high technology, you need more and more capital stock and capital investment. And if you do this, you reinforce the system about technology. Now, the big question is, what's happened if you reinforce the system with more and more technology? I try to understand this complexity because I didn't insist at one moment in the system thinking tools, but if you remind the system thinking tools, you have some variables who have the role of mediation, and some variables have a very high exit. If I coming back just to the first figure I use, but just to show you, if you are here, you have some variables in a system which are a very high level of exit, okay? And for Schumacher, technology have a very high level of exit. It's why this technology have a very complex consequence in my system. So if I use this technology, we see all the arrow go away from technology. And Schumacher insists, I think, on three consequences, very important consequences. The first one is the consequence of technology of urban and rural migration. And I will show you after. He was really concerned by if you had, for example, a country and you just had and you invest in technology, you start to modify the change between rural and urban migration. And it's very important for the South country, for example. But let me coming back to technology and just coming back to this very high level of exit in a system. Technology use fossil fuel consumption, so you just reduce more and more the stock of resource, so stock of natural capitals. And if you check this part of the system try to modify the regulation of the system. If you have no more natural capitals, how technology can still work? The second one, it's man alienation in technology. And I think he was more and more concerned how the system is reinforcing by this aspect of the consequence. More you need technology, more you develop alienation. And alienation has very bad consequence of human condition. You start to have an inhuman face of technology. And I think it takes a very good example. If you keep reinforce the system with technology, you start to give less and less value to manual work. I mean, the value of natural work is nothing. And in North country, this value can go down and down, and they give no human value and human face to the technology. The third argument, this is what I put in red. It's he's persuaded that technology have a great consequence on global social time. If you read, for example, Nicolas Georges-Roegen about production, he explained to you that when the technology gives you the capacity to go fast and faster, the time you save, you use to develop new technology to go faster and faster. I mean, you cannot reduce your time. And what just explained to you that when you develop this technology, the global social time just get away. You have no satisfaction and work satisfaction just go away. And you have a very bad consequence of human condition. I really like this argument because in degrowth perspectives, I mean, people who write in the 70s and 80s, they were very focused on time reduction. And this question was really great, how technology make us not able to use the time as we want to use it, and how alienation of the system just drive you to use more and more time for your work and more time for technology. So you are not saving time, you just use time for something else, which is more technology. So here, we just really understand that technology has a very bad consequence of human natures and living nature in general. And for Schumacher, it's a big problem. Let me just take two other examples of typing points now. How I use a third word, the third part of the system to really understand what's happened here. I just use a chapter talking about social and economic problems calling for the development of intermediate technology. You remember I told you that Schumacher pushed this aspect of intermediate technology. And what he tried to explain is what's happened with the system. Poor people getting more and more poor, and rich people start to become more and more rich. And I think if you could imagine what's happened today, we'll be trying to understand, oh, it's not 5% of the world who get all the research. It's just 1% of people who get 50 or 40% of the wealth. And what he tried to explain is, if we want to really go through these problems, we have to go through the foreign aid and the development planning. It's why he really contests the economic development or the way of the economist sees the development. he really believes that the problem is when you help the people, you start to reinforce all the bad consequences of the system. And I just take an example, what he calls the aid for development. It just explains that if you just focus aid for development for rural areas, maybe you can create some jobs, maybe you can reduce employment, but at the same time, aid it's one aspect of the system, and around aid there is more driving force who just regulate the system or reinforce the system, but not in a good way. And the big issue, for example, is poverty. If poverty creates urban migration, people leave from rural to go to migration, the growth, the wealth, start to be concentrated in urban growth. So the cities start to concentrate the wealth and at the same time start to concentrate inequalities. And at this moment, it's very hard time to get away from this. So how we could use technology adapted to rural population, to rural area, and how we can do this with a kind of limits population, because if the population is growing, I think the problems start to be bigger and bigger because working populations start to grow, you need job demand, and you can just reinforce the migration of rural people. So you can have rural depopulation. At this moment, I think I didn't produce this CLD here, but Schumacher produced a very good, interesting framework about education. It just explains that when you go to the south country or north country, when you pay for education or where you get paid for education, I mean, when the state pays for you for education, you should have a debt about all the citizens of the country, because be educated means you have to pay for that. So if the state pays for you, you have the debt, and you should be very careful about how you use your education processing. I'll just take an example. It just explains that more people are educated, more they want to modify the way the knowledge are transmitted. It means you start to choose the knowledge. You start to choose the value of the knowledge. And if you do that, more you get education, more you create a gap between non-education people and education people. And for example, he explains that if you go to South Country, educated people are more and more accepting the Western consumption models because they want really to adapt the system to the system of the country. And sometimes you facilitate the change of the system in the South Country. So you can get this. So it's a very interesting aspect of this typing point. So I'm not going to show you all the typing points in all the chapter, but I think it's a quite interesting discussion to say at one moment, because I really believe that small is beautiful is a way to say how we can change the system and not change and say, oh, I can just intervene at this moment or at this moment. It's really to find the way to change all the system. And when you start to use intermediate technologies that Schumacher introduced in the chapters in the book, you start to really believe how the system works. When you go to the chapter size of the city, for example, it's really quite interesting to what he proposed about how to define some limit in a city, because it's a very hard time at this moment when we see how many people living in the city today. You start to believe that the limits that means have a global view of the system. Limits can be a very small part of the system, and try to identify this. Okay, I think it's 3 o'clock. I don't want to go so much so far, but I just wanted to show you a few comments and your thinking about this book. I read this book in 1986. I was really impressed because I read this book at the same time that Limit to Growth. And I really, at this moment, I was just thinking, oh, do we have to go to the computer science, making some models, or do we have to change the system and try to find a way to make a post-growth issue at the end? And I think I'm still between the two because the book are really great, really helpful for the future. Thank you.
But thank you very much indeed, Arno. That was amazing, and I think delving into all of Schumach's work like that and putting it together in diagrams. Each of these diagrams could be a book of their own in terms of trying to explain what's going on. It's quite phenomenal. So yes, thank you very much for looking forward to where this develops and what you can do with it. So many ideas came out of that. It's, one thing that one little struck me was you talking there about technology with a human face. We're beginning to see technology with a human face arrive in terms of AI into being indistinguishable in terms of videos and people talking that nowadays. So we don't know whether it's a machine doing it or human beings. At the same time, I read an article today about the appalling conditions for some people in the world who are labeling data who actually to enable AI to actually happen. And that's sort of that just sort of the contrast of those two worlds where we're seeing wonderful outputs from all this, and yet behind the scenes, way down in different parts of the world, people are being exploited just to make it actually happen. That's let alone the carbon emissions that are coming out of AI as well, which is another matter altogether. So that was one of the little thoughts I had there. There are many others. Just one more from me before I open to the floor. Your diagram around education I thought was fascinating. It would be very interesting to see if some of those links are actually there, are actually being operated. Actually, do they are they just potential? And how much does our existing educational system sort of match that diagram? And where are the gaps that are missing? I saw that you had in there wisdom as part of the loop there. And to me, I would have put that one right bang in the middle of a diagram we really want. That's for me is the key thing for the future. So those are a couple of thoughts for me. I'm now going to open the floor to everybody else to ask questions. And yes, please with the hands up. And I think if I know you're okay to field answers directly, I'll just try and manage the hands. Richard, I think you came in a second, microsecond before Henry. So away you go.
Yeah, yeah, thanks very much. Yes, a microsecond really counts in this. Um, yeah, I really want to pick up on what you just said about AI, Ian. As you probably saw in my comment, it's something which I obviously want to ask about because it's a hugely disruptive thing in today's world. And to use that, I think, as a focus for, as it were, extending Schumacher's ideas into the very present and the very, very near future, I think we'd be missing a trick if we didn't do this, frankly, because there is so much force, economic and technical force, and indeed political force being applied here that it really does need this kind of an overview to say, hang on, before you go too far, have you thought about the following set of possibilities? And the people who are doing this stuff are saying the very same. I mean, they're getting quite nervous about it, frankly. And it's almost like they've created a beast they're not quite sure how to handle. So a lot of what you were saying on is really incredibly germane to the discussions going on right now as to what we do with this super high technology, which has huge implications, by the way, for education. Absolutely vast applications in education. If you talk about teacher to pupil ratio, and then start to think about how a large language model AI could improve the individual structuring of individuals' education, I think you begin to see just where this is going. So I'm not asking for an answer, but I really am asking for a recognition that this is something which really we need to get our hands around. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thanks, Richard. Oh no, any thoughts on that? Yeah.
No, I think it's quite interesting. It just I try to because I didn't show you here, but the question of chapter when you read Schumacher, it's what he put in every chapter. But at one moment you try to reconnect the chapters, and I think this is what it's really interesting. Not only to stay in the chapter to understand the driving force and the ideas of Schumacher, but to say at one moment how he make the connection in his book. And for example, education, it's very nice very nice item to really understand in the book, because you have the education process to really understand how is connection to transmission of value, transmission of know-how, transmission of science, of whatever. And at the same time, he has a big overview, or, oh, what are the consequences of education, of the way to understand development? And like I said, for education, what's happened in a country when you start to educate people and people start to become more and more educated, and some people are not educated, because you start to create a big power in the system, because the people with education start to say, oh, I don't really want to be with these people who have no education. I would like to have specific now knowledge for me because I know some education. So you start to understand how education reinforces inequality in the system. And I think he makes the point on this, to really understand that education, it's not only a stock of knowledge, it's a stock of knowledge. But at one moment, education starts to become a kind of driving force, because you reinforce the inequalities in a country. And I think connection between chapters is very interesting for that.
Great. Thank you, Arno. Henry.
Yeah, thank you, Arno. It's really, really interesting. There was just one thing which, and it's sort of linked to my comment in the chat about this link between global social time and technology and the sort of inverse relationship between them. And it's not the first time that I've heard that, and it's just something that I find quite fascinating, that we're on this kind of drive towards better and faster and, you know, things doing things for us, but it's actually having the opposite effect. And it seems to me about that we need to slow down, and it seems completely opposite to the drive towards faster, better, bigger, stronger, etc. And this link to jobs as well. So like the fact that we're almost driving towards fewer jobs, when actually is, you know, Schumacher advocates for more jobs, and that's what we should be moving towards. So I guess I'm throwing a thought out there about how, if you know, if you agree with that, and how we slow down and how we make that more of a philosophy for the future, because it just seems like the opposite of what we're doing.
Yeah. I still believe that you can read Schumacher as the specific rules of post-growth economy. And I think in my mind, you know, you have to go to the degrowth pathway, and after you go to the post-growth system. So you have to accept the idea that degrowth has to be there. And I still believe now, and I think reading Schumacher gave me reinforcement for the system. It's the only way to go through the degrowth system and the post-growth system. It's time work reduction. But if you use time work reduction, it's not using time for shopping or consumption. It's using time to do something like social activities, like activities for other one, like social and collectives goals, like leisure goals. So it means, for me, to change the system. So yes, I'm agreed. It's not a new ideas. It's why I just said, if you read Nicolas Georgescu-Roegen, he just explained to you that you have two choices. Keep learning about technology, and if you just get more time to get more technology, or accept to slow down. But are we able to slow down? Because slow down means now kind of vegetative life. What's happened if you start to slow and everyone just start to run around you? You know how you can do this? You start to be away from the society, or you start to change the system. And I believe that maybe you not change the system, you start to be outside the system. So it's very hard time to explain how we can just use this global social time and sharing. And for me, working time reduction is the best way to share. Now it's hard time to imagine this kind of society.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Arno. Jen, you've got your hand up. And you're visible.
Yes, I just wanted to sort of make some links between, there was a comment in the chat which sort of posed a question about from in terms of youth in developing countries, you know, and I just wanted to flag up that myself and John are going to be talking about this whole question of differential degrowth, because you know, there are some things that we want to grow and some places that need to grow. And there are some places, like most of where, well, at least some of the participants here live, that need to reduce our use. And it's this kind of combination of these two things that we'll talk a bit more about. So just to anybody who's thinking, this degrowth stuff is all very well, but how about the people who haven't got enough? We are going to discuss that a bit more.
Okay, thank you, thank you, Jen. Any more questions from anybody at this point?
Yes, can I ask,
Yeah,
Michael?
Yeah, Michael. Yeah, please go ahead.
When enough is enough, or when we can apply, or when we can start to look for the degrowth strategy. If we are in an organization and we have many economic challenges in a very dynamic environment, when we can say, no, we don't want to grow, we want to stabilize, or we want to degrowth. But when is it's time when I can say, yes, I want to go to the degrowth strategy?
Well, I don't know.
I think if you use okay, it's an idea, but this is why I spend so many time to really go to the steps of system thinking and all the time question the way to really understand the tools and really adapt the tools to which problems you want to design. And I think in 25 years, I think now we have some tools that everyone start to really understand, and we can have experimentation, get experience. I really believe that if you want to imagine a degrowth system, you can only use system thinking and system dynamics, not other methods. It's not possible really, because degrowth is just, it's not an economic state, it's really anthropology design. So you need to use anthropology to design what society you want for the future. And if you keep using methods, models that economic use, you will not ever be able to design what post-growth or degrowth means, because like I said, in every system, you must design and define the objectives. So if you said degrowth means we have to consume less, it's not really compatible with an objective of a system we explain to you, you have to consume. Same for public debt, same from public deficit, same for investments, same for whatever. So I think the big deal we have to do now in every system, this is the objective. You define the objective, you define the system. It's not possible to have a system for all the objectives. It's not possible. You have to choose. And so at one moment, we have to do it. So before to talk about, I don't believe in the economy of degrowth, really. Degrowth can be a dimension, can be an economic dimension, but it's not an economic background. I really hope that at one moment we're going to start to say, oh, we have to define the economic degrowth. We have to really reduce the size of the economy. It's the only way we have to do. And the economists are not able to do this. So we have to find another way to do and change the system. And change the system means what are the limits? What are the typing point, how to change the system, and not coming back in the system in 1 year or 2 years because we believe it's the wrong way. No, we have to do this. So it's very important about methods, and not only methods, it's which scenario, because I still believe that if you want to really have this post-growth state or whatever in the future, you have to accept the degrowth pathway. It's not very simple. It's very hard time for us. I still believe it, but you cannot build a society with the design of post-growth now, because if you do this, you're going to have this negative aspect in the short term. And so degrowth have to accept to just concentrate the negative aspect of the change. I don't want to imagine a society with all this negative background behind me. I want to imagine something positive. And to do this, you need to have this different way, different steps. So degrowth has to concentrate all the negative aspect of the degrowth system, because there is some negative aspect. We know this.
Mm.
But we know we need to do this to really understand and build this new post-growth system. And so if we do that, system thinking is very useful to really understand everything.
Okay, thanks.
Certainly agree with that one entirely. Thanks, Arno. Lucy, a question? Yeah.
Thank you so much, Arnaud. I can't pretend to have understood everything. The models are just way beyond my brain. And I think it's an amazing task that you've done to try and model this whole book. And I just wanted to check, have you deliberately left out the fourth part 4 on ownership and organization, or you just hadn't showed that in your presentation? Because that's the sort of more political dimension where he talks about scale and size, and I just wondered whether you just hadn't included that yet.
No, yeah, thanks for the comments, because I did that for the economic system. I mean, I use this chapter to say, okay, what do we have to change in the economic system to start to imagine what should be the society of Schumacher? And private property ownership, or the size, what he calls the size of the village, for example, it's a really good driver to understand how you can change the system. The problem when you do this, it's what Schumacher start to define in the book. It's you have to, when you want to change the economic system, start to touch the private property or ownership. You don't have to fight with a human visage. It's very hard time because there is some philosophical roots in the economic system. You have some doctrines, you have some school, you have some methods, some tools, and it's why it's very hard to really fighting a system like an economic system, because every step you get, you are not sure. You just have, success at the end. Sometimes you make one step and you're coming back 2 steps behind because you believe to explain, oh, this model is not useful, doesn't work, or you critics laborers or productivity, and you start to believe, oh, yes, I start to find a good solution. For me, the example I could take and Schumacher takes the example, is GDP. If you start to fight in GDP, it's a very wrong fighting in the system. Fighting because you spend so much energy to change one indicators and you don't change the system behind. Because we can change indicator and have the same roots and the same philosophical roots of the system. So, and I think Schumacher was afraid of that. It's at some moment he said, we have to be very careful to the wrong fighting. We start to engage. It's too much energy to change a system. If we didn't find a good way to do it, we have done a good target, we will change nothing. So yes, it's a big, and I think private property, or like you said, ownership, it's a big driver for profit and non-profit organization. Quite here, you start to engage the process.
I mean, I guess, sorry, I just wanted to come back, because I think Schumacher's book itself is also a little bit limited on that front. It doesn't really look at power, class, kind of those kind of structures, political structures, power structures. And so that is a weakness in the book in and of itself.
I agree with that.
I agree. At the end of the day, and at the end of the day, he was an economist, a metaphysical economist, but not really a political economist in that sense.
Yeah. And I think maybe this is the limit, when you start to make some CLD, you don't push the limit of the thoughts of Schumacher. So sometimes, which I didn't include here, it's really understand what are the weakness of the book, what are the strengths of the book. But it's quite interesting. Yes, your comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Ted. Good. Herbie, and then I think we'll call a break after Jen. Thank you, Herbie.
Thank you, and thank you for a very, very interesting lecture, a very complicated lecture, but really, really important lecture we've had. I think we're heading for discussion now, and not on limits to growth, but maybe limits to Schumacher, in the sense that this question of whether or not he emphasized class structures and so on enough has just been raised. I would like to raise another issue, which is what has already been hinted at, which basically Schumacher doesn't talk about energy enough. He worked for many, many years for the National Coal Board, one of the largest enterprises on the planet. And yet he doesn't hardly mention the need for changing energy systems, even though he implied that climate change is something that's coming our way. So the question of how that links to degrowth, I mean, certainly, obviously, he was not fully aware of the potential for solar and wind power and all the new energy technologies we have available to us now. So maybe he didn't go into that issue because he didn't really know how to replace coal energy that he was sort of so intimately linked to in his professional work. So the question now for me is, how does degrowth link to a new energy system? Because clearly we can't use as much energy as we have been using our fuels on this incredible range every year. We're burning about 1 million years worth of fossil fuels at the moment. So how can we move towards an energy system that links to degrowth and also links to a green economy? So this is something I would like to ask, to go into a little bit more detail. What are the leverage points that are really available to us to make that transition?
Yeah. I like the connection today between degrowth and the way to renounce to one activity. I mean, at one moment we can say stop for this activity for any reason. If you use what we call here the fresque of climate change, you start to understand the connection between human activities, armed conflict, and how climate change develop more conflict and introduce more producing of arms in the world. So arms is connected to climate. I think the big deal today is not to say, okay, we have to reduce to consume, we have to reduce to produce, we have to limit the size of the economics. We know that we have to do that. The question is how we do this, how we renounce to an economic activity, which is very hard time because there are jobs behind. There is some people who have a house and owner of the house, and they save some money for a long time, and they participate to the system. So the quite interesting thing, it's how we can use the democratic debate to set which activity we are able to renounce and which activity we want to push, because I think, as Janet said, we don't want to degrowth all the activities. We want to push the growth of specific activities. And I think...
But what are the leverage points that makes that transition possible?
I think for the moment, it's not really possible because of the public debt. I mean, no country can go to the degrowth transition because of the public debt. It's so huge, the connection, it's so important that the transition, it's not possible. So I would say the tipping point to change the system is just to go down the public debt. We have to just say public debt is zero. I know it's a big question today, but this is the only argument to not change the system today. This is a big tipping point to not say we can change the system. If we have this public debt in all the country today, it's not possible to go to the degrowth system, really. For me, I have this argument to say that it's not working time, it's not productivity, it's not efficiency. This is the public debt. If you are not able to reduce the public debt for most of the country, the stock is higher as a flow. So you can reduce the deficit? No way. The stock, it's huge, and stock, it's huge means you are not able to change the system. And my frightened today, it's to see every country try to reduce the public deficit, reduce social expenses, social protection, everything about ecology, the expense for ecology, just to reduce the deficit, the public deficit. But the question is not the public deficit, it's like the stock. So if you want to do this, you have to go the stock to zero. And the only way to say, okay, there is no debt anymore. We have to find a system to change. It's not an answer, I know, but if you want to imagine a degrowth system, this is the only way to do that. Reduce now and find a way to have no.
But who are the actors who make that happen?
Yeah. I'm agree.
Because
It's a very hard time to negotiate, and I don't imagine, people say, "Oh, okay, go, your debt go to zero. It's fine. We define a new system." But we have to do something with this, because if we do nothing,
well,
there is no degrowth system, there is no post-growth scenario.
Right. Thank you,
Okay.
Arno and Herbie. I think you've opened up a huge area for debate and discussion at a future stage on that one. Jen, and then we'll break for
Yeah, I think this is a fairly, myself and John are going to talk further about this, Herbie, because obviously the nature of the social forces and how this can come about and so on is really, really important, crucial. But I just wanted to ask Arnaud about your idea of economics. And I mean, I'm increasingly thinking that the idea of sort of evolutionary economics is kind of where we need to go. And that the reason is simply because, so we think of economics as a sort of framework, which then structures what we do. But if we think of sustainability as the framework, which structures what we do, then we need to experiment with different kinds of economic activities to see if we can, use different sort of pathways and approaches to do stuff. And that's what, new economy thinking seems to be doing, like trying to leverage public expenditure, for example, to try to develop a green and local economy more, as in the foundation economy, stuff like that. So that all I'm really saying is are we mistaken in sort of thinking that we've got to construct a new economics? I mean, in a sort of holistic sense, like a new template or something. Whereas what we need to be looking at is more a kind of experimental and emergent notion of what economics can become. Yeah, that's my question.
Yeah, maybe you know my answer. I still believe that the economic system, it's so resilient.
Yeah.
Crisis after crisis. You cannot compare economics to biodiversity, to climate change, to whatever you want. It's really a system that we can save, and we can save it because there is much lobbies, much company, much country who want to save the system. And when I say that, it's because the economic system is so simple to really design. You have a accumulation process. We can accumulate whatever you want. Look, your house. Maybe you accumulate many goods in your house. So accumulation is a very simple way to save money and to do something, because private ownership, it's very simple. You work, you save some money, you buy your house, you buy your car. It's just a way to present things. And productivity, it's a big driver, because since a long time we explain that if you want to create wealth, we have to be productive. And every change in social transition, we said, okay, we have to make an effort to get more productivity. You reinforce the system. So at one moment, I'm really, I would say, it's a hard time to say I want to change the economic system when you see this simple driver. Economic is not complex, really. It's very simple. It's so simple that everyone know what means get a revenue, get a job, consuming, saving, accumulation capital. So this simple fact makes very hard to reorganize the system, because people are just frightened. And I think every state would be frightened to say, oh, you want to change, but for what?
Yeah.
This system is so very easy to really understand. People make money, they make some profit, they reinvest profit. There is some consequence, but why to change the system? So my fear today, it's not that the economic system is complex. Biodiversity is complex. Climate change is complex. Economic system, it's very simple. And it's so simple that most of people don't want to change.
Great. Thank you, Arno. Sorry, Mark, I think if you could put your question into the chat, that would be great. I think it's time for us to have our break. We're running 15 minutes over. So if it's okay with everybody, we'll have a 10-minute break, come back at 22. to continue on with the next session, and look forward to seeing you in a minute. Go and get a cup of tea and have a little break.
Ian, could you make me a co-host, please?
Will do, John. Do that now. Yeah. Thank you, everybody. See you in a minute. Yeah. Where are you? Where's John? Here we are. Here you are, John, if you want to test that out. Away we go. And I believe Jen's going to handle the next session.
Hugh's going to chair the next session.
Hugh's going to check that out.
And I was going to go first and do a bit of a 10-minute spiel, and then John's going to do a 10-minute spiel, and then we're going to have a discussion.
Okie doke.
And then we'll have a bigger discussion with everybody here.
Yep. Okie doke. I'll make Hugh a co-host as well, just in case he needs to do it.
Good idea.
Right. Time for a cup of tea.
Right. Well, thank you, Ian. I'm going to be chairing. I'm Hugh Atkinson. I'm going to be chairing the next session. We're going to have a slightly different approach. We're going to have a dialogue for about 45 minutes between Jeneth Parker and John Blewett on the topic smallness in the economy. Can we have a movement for enough, even enough bagels possibly? How does this link with degrowth and convergence? Would you like me to let you know when there's about 5 minutes left of the 45? Yeah. Okay. So I understand Jeneth is going to go first. So over to you, Jeneth.
Thanks very much. So myself and John are both going to do a short-ish introduction to sort of contribute to the discussion we will then go into. So I was going to kick off by sort of returning to this notion of smallness and looking at it from a metaphysical point of view and thinking about how that affects the meta-economics, as somebody called it, of Schumacher's work. That he's not really interested in the finer, the sort of details or theory of actually existing economy. He's interested in sort of deeper questions of how is our current economy sort of symptomatic of a whole load of other ways of seeing things and ways of being in the world and so on. And where do those ideas kind of come from? And one of the things that took place last year as part of the 50 years sort of celebration and rethinking events was a very interesting day symposium organised by Lucy and Neil at Oxford Brookes as a part towards a special issue of the Journal of Social Theory, looking at Schumacher's Small is Beautiful. And many interesting presentations there, but one of them in particular pointed out the extent to which Schumacher's metaphysics is drawn from his religious convictions, specifically at that point as well, a lot of Catholic metaphysics. And I suppose I want to talk about today a little bit about what smallness might mean from the view of a different sort of metaphysics, one which uses systems thinking as a kind of basis to talk about what is in the world, but also one that's informed by some an approach that can be secular, a critical realism, but which allows space, as I would say, for metaphysics and spiritual perceptions and that validity. So let's think about smallness. Clearly, smallness is in some sense fundamental because everything larger is composed of smaller components. And so does that mean in some way, that the small elements are in some way more primary and more important? Well, people who talk about localism often think this. So let's dig into this a little bit more and think about the different varieties of importance of smallness. I was thinking about one of the things that sort of blew my mind slightly when I got involved in a big climate modeling project was the extent to which microorganisms in the ocean contribute to our atmosphere. And I think we probably all have seen new science and research about how, you know, our microbiome influences our health, and we are composed of colonies of different microbacteria and so on, which are part of our healthy living. So we have a lot of issues to think about there in terms of the value of smallness, and of course the beauty of really, really tiny organisms, as well as their utility to us and the fact that they contribute to a breathable atmosphere on our planet. We've also more recently got to know about the incredible diversity in our living soils, and this is an enormous aspect of sort of ecological understanding that is growing, and the role of mycelium and the way in which small organisms perform these wonderful interconnective tasks that sort of prop up the whole of life. So in many ways, these elements do look absolutely, you know, ontologically, that's what the things that are in the world, they're sort of like, I don't like to use these building blocks metaphor because it doesn't really work, does it? No, they are some of the living forces and dynamics which help make our world a livable world. And, you know, so we are beginning to appreciate them more. But then again, you know, and this is a sort of slightly counter argument or about the kind of metaphysics that perhaps we need. It's not smallness versus largeness or anything like that. It's an understanding of the way in which we nested scales, and the way in which also the smaller elements of life are dependent all in turn on through the evolutionary process, we now have a situation where so the small components of an ecosystem are dependent upon that ecosystem functioning as a whole, or at least to a certain, you know, within certain limits of robustness, let's say. And, you know, very sadly, an Arctic penguin chick is not a viable organism without Arctic sea ice, as we've recently been told. You may know we have a very big kind of regime shift crisis going on in the Arctic caused by climate change, which is putting the wind up, severely up, the scientific modeling community, because they can't actually work out quite why it's happening. So, you know, sorry, that was a bit of an aside because that's been on my mind ever since I read about it. So there are many ways in which the larger scale depends upon the health of its component parts, but sometimes, you know, those component parts also depend upon the health of what's around them. And this is not just the case for biological beings or us in our biophysical reality, but it's also the case with humans in society. You know, at some point, a sort of reductivist, so the idea of reduction or reductivism is when you sort of get the idea that one thing is primary, you know, primary component of reality, to which we can just reduce everything else. So, you know, everything is atoms, and the atomic level is the real level, and the energetic level is the real level, and nothing else matters. Well, that is reductivism. And we don't want it, because it actually means that we can't talk about all sorts of really, really important things, like life and how we support and sustain life. And the same is true very much of social elements. It was very interesting, sort of during the real onset of neoliberal ideology and Margaret Thatcher's statement, there's no such thing as society, there's just individuals and their families. This was taken, I'm not sure which came first actually, to a sort of reductivist extreme with a theory of methodological individualism in sociology, which basically said, you know, all your analysis has got to be about individuals, and anything else is a load of hocus pocus and doesn't really exist, because it's only individuals that really have existence. And of course, if you look at things like that, you can't really talk about very important social phenomena which emerge when people get together in larger groups. And, you know, it is, of course, well known, and we are increasingly experiencing this, that individuals and their families are not viable without a wider social ecosystem of support. And this is why we need, for example, things like just transition, which is going to help support people through change. So where was I going to? Okay, how this sort of plays out in terms of economy in Schumacher's book, and I think this is really important, is about the human scale and the way in which the human scale, the way people experience things, and how we have a limited capacity as individuals to relate closely to others. And it's very interesting the way in which maybe the internet is extending this, and so on and so on. But, you know, human beings have evolved. We've evolved our social capacities and our incredible minds and brains as part of being a very closely interconnected social group, where picking up cues and understanding where other people in the social group are coming from is a really, really important thing. And of course, social individualism doesn't understand this or understand the need for belonging and meaning that people have. And I think Schumacher was really trying to get at some of this in Small is Beautiful. And of course, the English version of the book was subtitled Economics as If People Mattered. And I can see my friend Lucy is next to me on the screen, and Lucy is really interested in what matters to people and their mental health and well-being aspect of society, and how that's really important part of sustainability. And I think we're only really beginning to realize that relatively recently. And this includes understanding the effects of trauma on individuals and groups. So, you know, the effects of adverse childhood experiences, which many people have, which have been studied in Wales, and how that can really affect you for life if you don't find techniques and support to deal with it. But, you know, we have, as Gabor Mate has worked on very effectively, also we need an understanding of how this affects groups and group trauma, like from, you know, historical episodes of group violence and so on, and continued racism, and all these things that we need to understand in order to work with people for sustainability and economic change in a way that is meaningful to them. And I think I'm coming to an end on this theme, but I just wanted to mention, I guess, that the aspects as well of smallness, and perhaps this was missed out in the brilliant title, is, as somebody pointed out, is speed and slowing down, and actually having the confidence to sit with yourself, and one could extrapolate this into wider society, without continually being distracted by things which take you away from a sort of deeper, maybe, awareness of yourself in the world and as part of all sorts of interrelationships and so on, and reflecting on how we might sustain those. And I wanted to sort of end on an ethical point as well, really, that I think in some ways, you know, Schumacher had a very strong sort of ethical set of values, a lot of which were definitely got a Catholic and Christian flavour, even though he did work with Buddhism later. But I think, you know, there's something really, really important in the way that systems thinking, to me, underlines the fact that in this web of relationships, everything we do as individuals is really important and has an effect on all the different aspects around us. You can say, okay, well, we are implicated in a system, and if we are in an unjust system, which we are, then it's our responsibility to at least try to partly change that system. So we can be doing that. But at the same time, you know, our very existence and our interrelations with our closer, those who are proximate to us, are really, really ethically significant and have flow out effects. I do like, there's a woman called Starhawk who writes about ethics and our relationship to the environment, and her sort of thing is, well, I don't feel I have to go out in search of rubbish everywhere, but I try to deal with the rubbish that is in my path. And I think, you know, that's a really important aspect of our being in the world that Schumacher, perhaps he was not going to be informed by a systems ontology of being as we can be now. And I think one of the advantages of this is that it's not religion specific. I think that systems thinking can help anyone to understand maybe or picture or embrace our responsibilities and our very beautiful and potential systems relations with all the things around us and other people. So I'll just end on that and hand over to John, who has got a presentation. Thank you.
Okay, let's see if I can share. Yes. I'm sharing my screen. For some reason. Okay. I hope you can see the presentation and not the chat. Can you see the chat as well? Because I can see the chat.
John, I can see the screen says enough is enough, revisiting smallness. I can see that on my screen.
Okay, that's excellent. In that case, I'll carry on. Okay.
Yeah, it's working. It's working.
Yes, that's what I like to see. We are coming to the end point, I think, in our long history. We can go on as we have been, or we can continue down, or we can stop. And what we can do is say enough. Now, I wonder who said that. Have a guess. Well, it wasn't Schumacher, it was Margaret Thatcher. And I think one of the things they do have in common is that it's time to say enough. Enough in terms of the types of world we have been creating for the last 200 or 300 years, and certainly enough in terms of the economic system, the capitalist economic system, let us say, which for the last 30 odd years has been the only game in town. My perspective is a sociological one. My academic background is in sociology and social anthropology, and a lot of this talk is influenced by sociologists. and some anthropologists. And I think if we need to understand how we get from here to a degrowth and post-growth society, it's as well to look at the way people live their lives, not just in advanced societies like us in Europe or the United States or elsewhere, but also in other places too. So I'm sorry, I'm going to have to move something. Okay. Degrowth means a reduction in material and energy throughput while ensuring well-being improves. Degrowth isn't just about the reduction in GDP, although it probably does mean that in effect. It also means a reduction in energy intensity. And when Herbert Giraudet asked the question of, where are the leverage points between sort of smallness or degrowth and energy, I think a number of degrowth writers have identified those already, in terms of redistribution of benefits, of housing, of urban development, the move away from privatized transportation to public, the reduction or eradication of intensive mega industrial projects and so on. And I think what degrowth more than anything else offers, certainly at this moment, at this conjuncture, is that it offers a new social imaginary, a new set of ideas, values, possibilities, and symbols. So for me, degrowth is certainly about education, but it's about changing the zeitgeist, because the vast majority of people aren't going to read or study the types of things we might do on either systems thinking or degrowth, but they will get a sense that the world is changing, and it can change in a different way to where it's going at the moment. And I think one of the things which degrowth really does emphasize, and continuously now, I think, is that a lot of the problems is to do with the capitalist economic system. It is to do with growth. It is to do with accumulation. It is to do with the profit motive, which is the primary motive in economic activity. And it is also to introduce. It is also to do with the problem of scarcity. And this leads to competition, and this leads to the desire to always have more. We need more growth in order to ensure that the problem of scarcity can be resolved, that poverty can be eradicated, but the more degrowth we have, the more scarcity still seems to exist, and the poor, as they say, is always with us and remains so. Marx used this wonderful equation, MC_M1. Money invested in capital leads to more money. That's the essential driver. And the social imaginary, which degrowth is, has got to say, well, that is just one possible driver of social and economic activity. And it's the one which we need to actually prevent from fashioning the future or the future ahead of us. The way to do that is to look at what our economic system, our capitalist economic system encourages us to do. It encourages us to compete. It encourages us to consume. A lot of people, it seems, gain their their purpose and their meaning through being able to acquire more material goods, more wealth, and through that accumulation and through that consumption, they are able to compete for higher status and esteem and standing in the world. It's what Fred Hirsch referred to as positional consumption, and what Veblen referred to as conspicuous consumption. That seems to be the motivation for a lot of people in our materialist, consumerist society. So dealing with this, and dealing with the problem of scarcity, the degrowth imaginary turns things around. Yorgos Kallis, the Greek economist and degrowth theorist, writes, the only response is that everyone will have enough if we limit ourselves and share what we already have. Only when we accept our wants are limited and can be satisfied will we finally enjoy an abundant world. So the idea is not to look at the world as providing scarce resources, but providing abundant resources. The problem being, of course, that abundance which the world offers is not shared equally, not shared fairly, and in some cases, not shared at all. And if we look at the idea of abundance, the wanting more, perhaps we can trace that idea of seeking abundance through dealing with scarcity, through mercantilism, through the trading system which developed in Renaissance Venice, and through to the development of industrial capitalism in the 18th and 19th century. But we can look at other worlds, other values, and other modes of living. And this is what anthropology does. You know, Claude Levi-Strauss, the famous structural anthropologist in France, said that it's, critical anthropologists can show that other worlds are possible, have been possible, and are indeed actually existing at the moment. So with this, we can look at various other peoples in the world and see how they approach the natural world. They approach what they hold in common, what they are able to secure from nature, and how they view abundance. If nature is respected, if what is seen as being enough for everybody, or more than enough for everybody, a problem doesn't exist if that abundance is shared equally amongst all. It only becomes a problem when it isn't. So nature's generosity in this context is something which has to be looked after, be nurtured and respected. And the change of values means that what we need to look at through degrowth is the idea of not so much more, accumulation and so on, but sufficiency through cooperation at work, through the relations we have with other people, through being able to what Hartmut Rosa, the German sociologist, talks about as resonance, that we are able to gain happiness and satisfaction and the feeling of meaning through our relationships with the wider world, and through conviviality. And we can talk about convivial technologies as well as convivial societies, people helping each other, and technologies which are being able to be reused, repaired, and managed effectively. The notion of the commons is something which a lot of degrowth theorists and a lot of anthropologists refer to. And one of the examples often given is with the lobster fisher people or fishermen in Maine, who share their catch when the catch is bad. That way they're able to preserve the abundance of the ocean and continue living, rather than, as our industrial fishing industry does, scrape the ocean floor for what's ever left. So sharing is fundamental. Sociality can operate as a key term, and it can also operate as a form of environmental regulation. Once we share, once we talk with each other and relate to each other, then we can preserve the environment. But we need, certainly in the wealthy global north, to set limits, maximum and minimum limits to consumption levels. And the notion of consumption corridors is something which can be used as a device to start doing that. Yes, we still consume, but certain things we need to consume less of, and certain things we need to consume more of. We also need to recognize that economics can be, or economic life can be organized in other ways too. I think the anthropologist Marcel Mauss is important and is sometimes referred to in degrowth literature because of his work on the gift economy. So that, you know, what is good, what's important to us, what is our good fortune, is not just that which can be couched in terms of purchase and sale. We need to ensure, even in the global north, as well as in the global south, that everybody has enough in order to live a decent life. And universal basic services, for me, is very important in this because it provides a social and a collective provision of those things which people need. For me, obscene growth in homelessness in affluent countries is largely a result of society not sharing equitably, of housing being seen as a financial asset rather than as a potential home. And that has led to accumulation. That has led to the really misshaping of our cities. We also need to reevaluate the logical work, to actually abandon the idea of productivity, but to look at what work is actually for, not just producing those goods and services which we need, but creating the satisfaction which human beings need, what Hannah Arendt referred to as sort of a life activity. So we can consume less, and we can produce less, and we can consume better. David Graeber, another anthropologist, wrote a book or published a book just a few years before he died called Bullshit Jobs. There's a lot of jobs which actually don't seem to do anything at all, have no intrinsic value, no intrinsic satisfaction. Although it might lead to the increase in GDP, they're often quite soul destroying. Wouldn't it be better if work can be reevaluated so that we can have pleasure in in what we do, what we produce, what we make. We can take pleasure in our creative skill, and that we have sort of useful work rather than useless toil, and that we work not in order to live, but live in order to engage in creative work, to fashion a world which enables ourselves as human beings and the world that we inhabit to flourish. Degrowth theorists point to a number of what's referred to as nowtopias, activities, projects, campaigns, ideas, which in some ways prefigure the type of world. And if degrowth theorists want, and if these can be scaled up, that the mosaic of various social movements can create a coherent and attractive pattern, then that social imaginary which degrowth theorists are in the business of creating could actually take root. And those key principles which drive our society at the moment can be changed in a different way. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so just to get our conversation started, John, we discussed we're talking about sort of a movement, a movement for enoughness and perhaps differentiated degrowth, recognizing that some areas still need to grow and many people don't have enough. But what do you think are the threats to such a movement? What are the problems to such a movement? And one of the things that I just wanted to sort of pick up on is I think that messaging for such a movement is actually quite tricky. That the idea that we have this abundance of nature, I can think of that immediately makes me think of two slight problems with that. That abundance sounds like something that is never going to end and that doesn't need to be cared for. But of course, we need to regenerate nature, and it's not an endless sort of cornucopia. And we better actually get on with that quite soon. Maybe abundance sort of might get confused with the idea that nature is infinitely robust.
Well, I think that anything can be co-opted by those people who either don't like the idea or just simply or don't understand the idea or simply wish to protect their own particular vested interests. The idea, I think, of abundance is that you look at it in context. There's enough for everybody. The world is abundant unless we exploit it to such an extent that we denude it. And if people have sufficient of what the world offers, what nature offers, rather than just simply looking for more in order to be happy, go shopping, make me happy, buy some more, make myself happy. If people can look at that, we in that way, then abundance isn't seen as this never-ending source of goodies. And I think what this means is that abundance needs to be conserved and protected through our actions and by operationalizing different values. That's what I, and the meaning of words is within the context. Words can change. Look at the way sustainability has been co-opted by all sorts of people to mean something very, very different to what a lot of ecologists and environmentalists thought it meant 20 or 30 years ago. So it's the context, I think, is important. And it's the argument, it's the narrative. It's
Sure.
the
I suppose what I'm trying to point out is that one of the things that messaging people do, and I think we need to, we need to learn from the enormous success of how people go about it in the advertising industry, but also, there are social marketing and framing organizations which help us sort of critique and improve on our messages. And I would conclude from what you've just said that caring for abundance is something that makes sense, but doesn't absolutely assume, that it's like a tap that's turned on. The other one of the things that people were asking about earlier, and I just wonder if this might not be a good place to concentrate on, because just for everybody, we were thinking that we could have a discussion which was like looking at the strength, opportunities, threats and risks, doing a SWOT analysis of a sort of a movement for enoughness and or degrowth. The opportunities for this seem to be something that's on people's minds. Like, what are the pathways? What are the possible pathways that we see now that are actually tending in this direction? And can we sort of, emphasize or speed up the processes, some of which are already underway? Do you have any ones that particularly occur to you on that?
Well, I'd just like to back up a bit. You talk about messaging and advertising. Yeah, I think we need to go beyond the soundbite and actually start up longer conversations with people. Everybody, if given an opportunity, if given the time, if they are able to generate sufficient confidence, can talk through things. And we talk a lot about citizens' assemblies. We've seen discussions operate, certainly in the abortion referendum in Ireland, and Brexit to some extent, but certainly the discussions in Scotland over independence. People can actually talk about things. So yes, and the way we can start scaling things up and look at those areas, for example, and one of the things which interests me particularly is housing. There are ways in which housing and construction, certainly, which is intense, is highly carbon intensive, can change. We could redistribute the housing stock. We can increase social housing, which provides people with the wherewithals. We can look at the ways in which people can grow more food within cities, encourage gardening beyond the idea of simply borders. A lot of new housing estates don't have gardens at all. Why, if you had more time and you're not just running as fast as you can to keep up, why can't you start developing your garden in a different way? Why can't you start growing, some vegetables or having some wildlife gardens? A lot of new housing doesn't have even the space for it. And I think we need to think about different ways in which we move about. And in that regard, I would also think, well, maybe we need to move about less, or look at the idea of when you're living in urban areas, why do you need to drive in order to buy loads of the stuff you need? There's a lot of work now around the idea of the 15-minute city. Get everything you need within 15 minutes walk. Actually spend time. But to do that, we've got to get off that sort of treadmill of production, of competition. And those sociologists who write about social acceleration or onto a good thing. And the system, the system as we inhabit at the moment can only remain stable if it keeps on speeding up and speeding us up. So we've got to find ways of slowing it down.
5 minutes left. Okay, 5 minutes.
Yeah, thank you. I think I'll get a few points in here edgeways.
Sorry.
That's all right.
I've shut up now.
Well, actually, I guess I'll answer my own question, because I guess I was thinking about what are the current social forces that are already underway that seem to me to be pushing us towards opportunities for real major economic change, and perhaps giving us opportunities to put forward a different sort of social contract. And I still use the word sustainability because I think, you know, it's got quite a lot going for it nonetheless. And sometimes it's easy to change words and think that you're making progress, but actually it doesn't really change that much. So I'm thinking about things like the fact that most of our privatized utilities are now in the most terrible state and are likely to be coming back. There's enormous pressure. I am thinking about the UK, but I think this is an issue in many developed countries, that we have infrastructure hollowed out from years of underinvestment and experiments in privatization and extraction from sort of the common public goods of infrastructure is a big thing that is happening. We can see this with our water system, just to name one, in the UK. And, you know, I think that the tipping point could be there for at least tipping to a different form of social business for many utilities. And there's a political argument to be had there about how we want things to be run, whether we think state-run, big state-run enterprises are a healthy thing for democracy or an eco-democracy. I'm not sure I do. So that's one thing. But of course, the enormous, as Richard was saying, and other people can go on about this more because I don't know that much about it, but the way in which artificial intelligence is already beginning to hollow out jobs is making people think, actually, you know what, we're going to have massive, massive social unrest if we don't have some form of universal basic income, which will then allow people to slow down and become more grounded and more reflective, provided that it's adequate. There's also a rise in people supporting the public, supporting the rights to basic means of life like food, housing, water, and connectivity in terms of media. So, you know, there are many social trends actually here which speak to the fact that people do have a belief in a kind of model of sufficiency. I think one of the key things that and this might be a good point for you to deal with, John, if you want to, is we have to have a sort of different idea of freedom, because, you know, neoliberalism and our economic system has kind of sold us that on this idea that how can we continue to talk about human self-development and self-expression and, you know, that divine dissatisfaction that humans have, and sort of make a new model of freedom with an idea of enoughness and degrowth, which with the best will in the world, you know, the French call it sobriety. Well, I know that concept wouldn't be super attractive to everybody, especially young people.
I think, you know, you're not free if you're on this treadmill of production and competing and against everybody else in terms of how many goodies you have. I think you know, the idea that you can only have freedom within a market society means that you know, capitalism is the only way in which freedom can be achieved, even though a lot of the big capitalists are quite happy to work with authoritarian regimes. They actually don't need either freedom or democracy. I also think, you know, driver for change is
1 minute left. 1
The
minute, John.
remunicipalisation of certain services, we've seen that in Manchester with transport, and I think that's important. And I think putting decision making as low as possible, shifting power from central government to local government, I think is incredibly important too. And I think the other area where change can be really forced through is through the network of progressive mayors within the major cities. Whether you're talking about Barcelona or London or whatever, there's some good things happening there.
Okay, thank you, John. I'm anxious to move on because
Yes.
even during the discussion, I've got 3 questions already to be posed. So obviously, you've both stimulated people so much. So I think enough of Jennifer and John now.
Enough is enough.
An abundance of questions. Okay, thank you. The first, thank you very much for that. You've raised some very good points, which clearly has motivated the audience. So first of all, the first hand I saw was Lucy Ford. What would you like to ask, Lucy?
Oh, sorry. Thanks so much, John. I agree with everything in your presentation, and Jenith too. My only comment, or I guess question or thought, is the more I think about it, the more I think the word degrowth should be avoided and something else needs to be found, because it's just not very sexy. It's negative, right? And it's also not applicable to the whole world. I mean, the global south hasn't really grown enough in some ways, and to tell them to degrow is a bit of a smack in the face. So actually we could use a concept from the global south like buen vivir, for example, which is the living well or good living that sort of been developed in the Latin America, I can't remember which country, which is basically saying exactly the same thing as degrowth, or maybe even just thinking about the common good or something. I'm sure you agree with me, John. You know, I just think it's the word degrowth is not so nice, and perhaps we can come up with a better one or just rephrase it slightly. That's my comment.
I will respond to that, John, and then Jenith.
Yes, I recognise degrowth, you know, can be interpreted in different ways, and it's not really a sexy term, as you say. You know, good living, human flourishing, well-being. I think all of these things are good, and I think what will emerge through use is a term which is actually applicable and actually catches on. But it started 10, 15, or likely more than that years ago, and this is where we are. Like, we were stuck with sustainable development. Hopefully, another term will resonate.
Yes, of course, in Wales we've got the well-being approach, and we've got also the well-being economy. And I like that because it states quite clearly that the goals of the economy should be well-being. Yeah, I agree with you. I think degrowth should be seen as a really important strategic tool in a toolkit, rather than the name of a whole movement, because it doesn't convey that whole picture in the way that is needed. I agree.
Yes, means to an end.
So degrowth could help to frame our thinking, but it's not something you put in a manifesto and try and sell to the public, is it?
Be the headline.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for that. Yeah, Nicolette, your hand went up second. Thanks very much.
Lots and lots of issues thrown up by the whole conversation, and I've just wanted to go through a few points which occurred to me as they did. I was very excited by Arno's opening presentation, but his closing remark that the economic system is too simple to change left me absolutely desperate to make some comments. And I think at one level, I do agree that our global economic capitalist system is incredibly difficult to change, and that is because it is so it's an ideology, and it's so culturally and institutionally embedded in the economic superpowers of the globe. And I think it was Richard has sort of expressed that comment somewhere in the chat as well. But where I disagree with the statement is that there's just one economic system, and it's why I was so pleased to hear Jennifer open her part of the discussion, talking about nested systems and the codependence of both higher and lower levels on their proximate systems in that. What I think was implicit from what you said, Jennifer, but I would have liked to have heard it more explicitly, was the notion that the economics system, ideally, it's not in practice, ideally would be embedded in the wider social systems. And I think this is where it ties up with small is beautiful. I think the real problem we've got, and it's an existential problem, is that the global economic system has grown far too big. It's overshot planetary boundaries, and given the climate of just all the records which have been broken now, I think we are staring at potential collapse. But so let me. The other thing I wanted to hear, and again, I think it was implicit in what was said in the latter half of the other, is more about living systems and less about sort of mechanical systems. And once you're talking about living systems, where and systems which things which do live and sustain life, they actually create the conditions which are conducive to life. They're always evolving. So I think we heard the words evolutionary economics and ecological economics has come up. And I think that gives me hope that we can evolve into something. There is potential in when these systems evolve. And now I just want to pick up some points which I think I heard.
Can you just do a couple more, because we've got other people coming in as well.
Okay. And I also draw hope from the idea of islands of coherence, which was alluded to in the last bit, where I think there will be opportunities for particular economies to emerge in particular sort of regions with particular sets, which are going to be much more towards the ones which have just been spoken about. Thank you.
Would you like to come in on that, Jennifer? Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah, I think the point about the economy needing to be nested in the social and in the ecological is that in one sense it actually is. So we have an imbalance in my mind, to put it very sort of simply, between reality, where actually, economies can't function without nature, and economies can't function without a social fabric within which to work, So they are, in fact, embedded in these things, but not in the theory we're using doesn't recognize this. And so there's an enormous mismatch and a chronic mismatch between the theory, the emperor's new clothes is really the metaphor here. The emperor hasn't got any clothes. Reality is biting back. And I think we're going to see a rapid search for new solutions. And I guess I think the systems community can play its part. Systems thinking, you know, for sustainability, community can play its part in helping generate some new solutions and ideas. So I live in that hope. With regard to regeneration, we have actually discovered that although I was stressing, you know, that ecologies are not limitlessly robust, actually they even if we leave them alone, even if we've sort of damaged them quite severely, some ecologies can regenerate in a way which people have found surprising. But we've got to stop destroying them first, and then there's possibilities for regeneration. And the possibilities for regeneration with people, communities, and nature are limitless. And those forces and those powers are there, and we just need to give them a chance to work. So yeah, I don't know if you've got anything to add, John.
No, let's move on.
Okay.
Mark. Thank you, Jeneth. Thank you, John.
I'll just try and pick up on one or 2 points. Speaking about ontological positions, in essence, there are 2 ontological frameworks that can be used to both understand where we are and where we need to get to. The first one is the ontology of stasis, which is the one that drives human thinking and drives economies and drives society. And that is where things are and then they change and then they are again. That ontology emphasizes static, isolated objects and individuals. And that, of course, causes all sorts of difficulties that we see manifest wherever we look, in terms of our disconnect from nature, in terms of our disconnect from each other. The other basic ontology is one of process, which sees things as ever evolving and relational, dynamically intra-related. And that focuses then on not isolated objects, but interconnected and intraconnected subjects. And it focuses on the notion of evolution as a fundamental feature and change as the only constant. And that's part of the work I did when I was working as an academic before I retired. Of course, there's the process metaphysics of people like Bergson and Whitehead. That then leads me into the question of focusing in this issue of economics, and just picking up that economics as a science is driven by that stasis ontology in terms of the way it thinks. The only economics that doesn't do that is, as I think it was Nicolette picked up, ecological economics. And the difference between ecological economics and environmental economics is simply that environmental economics sees the environment as part of the economic model, whereas ecological economics sees economics as part of the ecological model. And that's a fundamentally different perspective, radically different perspective. And so I'd encourage people perhaps to look at that. And that's the work, of course, of Herman Daly and John Cobb, who I know quite well. The last point I just want to make is this. Well, 2 points. One is an example from my own experience. Because I'm retired, I'm medically retired with this ridiculous multiple sclerosis, and I worked in Australia for so long, I will have no national insurance pension, and I'm reliant on the University Superannuation Scheme in Australia, and that is a stocks and shares scheme, and all of my pension from the Australian work I did when I was living there is invested in what's known as sustainable high growth stocks. And if they don't keep growing, I am, to use a technical word, stuffed. I will be destitute. Thankfully, they are growing like gangbusters at the moment. Please keep growing, please. This is very serious. I'm making a serious point, of course. And you know I'm making a serious point.
Okay, yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Can you wrap up, because we've only got 2 minutes left, and
the very last point is this.
Come to your last point. Yeah, thank you.
Management at the moment that very universal thing that all sentient creatures practice. For us as Homo sapiens, we practice it solely for the purpose of making money. That's the only reason management has been tailored. If you turn management away from the sole purpose of making money towards its main purpose of being restoring the environment and developing ecological well-being, lo and behold, things can change very quickly. And I've got lots of examples for that, but I'll shut up right now.
Okay, thank you very much, Mark. Do you want to respond to that at all, Jennifer or John?
I'll let John go first this time.
Okay, right.
Yes, we need to regenerate the economy. Regenerate the ecological system. Absolutely. I think, there are ways to do that, but I think we also need, in order to do that, we need to regenerate ourselves in some ways too, to move a long way from the idea of Homo economicus, that we are relational creatures and we cannot survive without being in relationship with other people and without being in relationship to the wider world, both the social world and the environmental one. So, unless we do have those connections, then I think we don't stand much of a chance in fashioning a world where good living or well-being defines us. So for me, I think if we're going to change the world, we need to change ourselves.
Thank you, John. Yeah, Jennifer. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Mark, just an interesting point you made about process philosophy. I think that it has awful lot of obviously very completely important points for us, but I do also think I don't find it terribly socially useful, and one of the reasons I like critical realism, which I think can accommodate most of the important aspects of process philosophy, is that it's a link to a philosophy of human emancipation and freedom, I think, and it's also got very strong links to the labor movement, which, in many ways has been the driver of many improvements to social well-being across for the last couple of centuries. And I think we need to have connections with that, thinking about the actual social forces that can make things happen. The labor movement is changing. I am part of, or I'm in the network around green transition in the labor movement, and there's a hell of a lot of thinking going on, and even some trade unionists are recognizing that we are beginning to get into a post-growth arena now, and thinking about what does that mean for their members and what does that mean for a new kind of labor movement, a new kind of social contract. So yeah, I think there's a room for a lot of synergies between many different strands, and that we don't just want to focus on one or two, but to bring them into a constructive relationship. That's always the aim. So thank you very much for that point.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. I'd like to thank Jennifer and John for the points they raised and their interesting dialogue. It's raised a lot of points which I think we could further develop. I think it's the start of the thinking here, and more discussion and thinking will be needed, and it'll be enjoyable as well. I'd also like to thank actually all the questions, very stimulating, good questions as well. So thank you very much for a really good session. I'd like to bring that to an end, and we're now coming on to the final session, which is going to be, I think, Sheila Llewellyn will be talking. And who's going to chair? Is it Mike? Are you going to chair this particular session? Or
it wasn't Mike. No, I was going to chair this.
You were going to chair, and he was just going to
he was
going to come in on it. Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, definitely.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for being an excellent chair as always.
Thank you very much, Jennifer.
Yeah, so I'm now happy to introduce Sheila Llewellyn, who is a long-standing community worker, fundraiser, and activist in many ways, and she's going to talk about the value of small local action. And this is going to be a relatively short presentation, and then we can have some input towards moving towards the end of the day. So thanks, Sheila. Over to you.
Okay, yeah, it is going to be short. Quick question. Do we finish at 5?
Well, we can go on beyond if there's a discussion going on. Yeah.
Okay, okay. Okay, so sorry everybody that I missed the beginning as well. I couldn't make it then. And also sorry that I'm purple. I don't know why that.
Oh, really purple, but don't worry about it. It's quite groovy.
It looks like I'm in a weird
Hey.
space
Yeah.
pod or something.
At least it's not deep purple anyway. So.
No, it's a lilac. Looks a bit stormy. Yeah, so I'm going to talk about smallness and community action. So like Jen said, my background has been in community work for a few decades now, and I've experienced a lot of small groups of people coming together in the different communities where I've worked and achieving great things. So I had a little discussion with Jennifer, I think it was last week or the week before, because I gave talked on this same theme at the conference last year on Small is Beautiful. And I started it with a Margaret Mead quote. And the quote is, "Never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, like-minded citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever did." And that was in 1978. And Jen said, well, I thought that everything else that you said was really good, but not that quote. But I thought I actually would like to just stick with this idea of Margaret Mead's and many other people's, that a small group of thoughtful, like-minded citizens can change the world. Maybe not, indeed, it's the only thing that ever did. There's a lot to be debated in that. There's far more complexity in what changes the world than just a group of small, like-minded people. But actually, a small group of like-minded people can do all sorts of things. And history has shown time and time again that passionate individuals coming together with a shared vision and purpose can create meaningful and lasting change, and even in the face of insurmountable odds. So for me, I think that that's where I put my efforts and energies in terms of my working life, and I suppose my outside of working life as well, is working with people who have got common ideas, common visions, to try and be involved in that and make that not just start but grow. So I'd like to see that area of that part of the fabric of our society and our community life as where the growth happens. So also, I haven't got a polished presentation, and apologies for that. I wish I had, because that type of presentation I think works really well on a Zoom meeting. So I have just taken some notes. So, but I think I could have got my points across better with a shared screen. But I'm not going to do that. It's reflection, really. I'm just reflecting on what some of the things that have been achieved in the community sector, which is the NGO sector, the charity sector. So, you know, the small group of people doesn't have to be in that sector. They could be in a different sector. But my experience is the sort of local grassroots. And so just reflecting on some of the examples of small groups of people that have got really quite big and influential, I just jotted down a list of ones. Well, I Googled a list of ones that have achieved stuff, and that list includes the Montgomery Improvement Association, founded by Dr. Martin Luther King in response to Rosa Parks' arrest for refusing to give up her seat on the bus, which led to all sorts of change within the legal system in America. Greenpeace, a small group of community activists who felt strongly, starting in Vancouver in Canada in 1971, to protest against nuclear testing, and look at the influence that Greenpeace is having now in the world. the Women's Institute across the UK. I don't know whether the Women's Institute actually stretches across the world, but small groups of women coming together to do things in their local community, to meet and taking on policy issues as well, and having an influence on the wider picture. The fair trade movement, the Arab Spring protests, you know, there are lots of these movements that are about wanting to make a change and wanting to make a difference. Small groups of like-minded people coming together and making a difference. So so that's just, you know, a general point. I'm not going to go very deep. I'm not academic. I don't read academic stuff very much. I do read lots of stuff around the things that I'm interested in to do with community action and change. But I committed the sin of asking ChatGDP what difference do small community organizations make at the grassroots level. And so I'm just going to tell you what ChatGDP said, which in fact ChatGDP is very clever. I don't know if anybody else uses it, but it gives you a good trawl. It's not definitive, and I know that it, you know, you can't rely on it. You know, we can't rely on ChatGDP to inform our ideas, but it's a useful tool, and I'm finding that I am using it in my fundraising work, and it assists me in trawling information. So what ChatGDP said about the difference that small community organizations make is it's a multifaceted role. I liked it. Enhancing the quality of life for individuals and communities in the UK, addressing social, economic, cultural and environmental challenges through their diverse range of activities and services. And a list of examples of qualities: passion and commitment, innovative ideas, networks and connections, inspiring others, focus and adaptability, symbolic power, something for people to be inspired by, and impactful actions. So, you know, I've got 5 minutes before we're scheduled to finish. I'm not going to go into detail there. So, you know, in Wales, there is a thriving economy of small.
You're welcome to go on for a bit longer, honestly. Carry on. Don't feel constrained by time.
Okay. So, yeah, and it's and for me, it's just all important and interesting stuff in school. For me, in my education, we didn't learn anything about the voluntary and community sector. That it was, you know, all through my education, we're not taught about what the community sector does. We might experience it in our lives. You know, we might be a part of a youth club or a part of, you know, a community activity of some sort. But it's not something that children are taught about particularly, although, you know, that it does come in a little bit more in the last decade or so. In the baccalaureate having a community element in it. So when I left school or left further education, completed my degree, living in Cardiff, I just started to discover lots of things that were happening in this way, you know, people doing stuff, movements, and one of the campaigns that I got involved in was Cardiff Residents Against the Barrage. And that was very informative for me and inspiring at a young age. It was quite a big campaign, and it was a determined group of people who questioned, why is this being constructed in our city when it costs so many millions of pounds and it does very little to improve anything about the quality of life in the city. You know, that, you know, this is all very debatable, but, you know, so through that process of meeting people who are putting a lot of time, effort and energy into researching, into attending various meetings with the Development Corporation, I witnessed, you know, a process of change, which the end result was a code of practice that was part of a statute that protected the residents of Cardiff in the certain areas that were going to be affected by the raising of the groundwater table against damage to their properties. And you know, and I think since then, I've just continued to seek out people who want to get together to make those sorts of changes. And so just to tie, so this is a really skipping over things. I'm not going into very much depth or detail. I'm just putting points out for discussion, I suppose. But I remember sitting down with Jenith probably at least 10 years ago, maybe longer, and her describing this model of change, which I quite liked. And so, and it was going back in history, how structures of power have been led and changed. So, you know, so we have had monarchy, we have had democracy, and we now have the private sector and the capitalist influences. And further down the line, what Jen's vision at the time, or Jen's model that she was suggesting to me at the time, is that, you know, it's for the future, if we could have types of structures and organizations that were values driven, then it's the turn for a sort of a new chapter where the social economy and the community economy has more influence and more of a lead in terms of how our world is shaped. So I feel that to kind of inform it or to make a change like that happen, it's necessary for small groups of people to come together about things that they feel strongly about, and that if that didn't happen, then a lot of the changes that have happened over the decades, over the centuries, wouldn't have done so. Very brief, and that was 10 minutes. And so that I wonder if there's something I could finish on. So no matter what happens. So when, you know, like I've been very inspired through COVID by how volunteering across the world really took such an important role. So public services don't reach people who are self-isolating in their houses, but the people on the street or the people in the community are able to, in a way that other services don't. And you know, I've read accounts of in how people survive when in war zones or in natural disasters, where, you know, like we run these campaigns, millions of pounds are donated through charity appeals, and they don't necessarily reach on the ground. So how do people survive on the ground? It's through that community organizing, which I would suggest is sort of a really important part of the fabric of our lives, and what makes it possible for well-being to be protected when it isn't protected by other structures.
Oh, thank you very much, Sheila. That was great, and I really like the way you picked up on the thing as well about that community action is often a hothouse for developing people's skills and active capacity to be active citizens. And it reminds me of being in Hungary, you know, after the sort of Velvet Revolution, when and we were talking about civil society and sustainability, and my Hungarian friend said, well, we don't have civil society in Hungary. We weren't allowed to have it. What we have is a wait and see what they say in Moscow syndrome.
Yeah.
And, you know, without that community action and that experience of learning through change, I think, you know, we'd be all the poorer. So thank you so much for that. Has anybody got things that they would like to highlight or contribute on that theme?
Just
Yeah, carry on. Is that Hugh?
Disney, yeah, thank you, Janet. I think I agree with you in terms of the importance of community activism, but do you also think that that would be enabled so much more with a well-supported, vibrant and well-resourced local democracy? Because I can think of many examples historically in Britain over the period where, you know, things like anti-racism, gay rights, etc., all those kind of key issues came out of activism which was supported by local authorities in London, in Manchester, in Sheffield. And so local democracy, you know, is key to supporting. So it's about, in a sense, it's about kind of medium-sized bigness supporting small community activism. Yeah.
Of course. Yes, absolutely. It has to knit together. You know, we're not islands. We have to work with each other, you know, and a small community group won't achieve very much in isolation. It needs to work with partners, you know, and work with the bigger picture. Otherwise, no, that whole it's far more complex. Yes, the systems are complex, and so yes, your local democracy is an important part of our lives too. Yeah, and it's I think I agree with you. Yeah.
Sometimes small groups have fought for democracy, of course, as well. But,
yeah.
Okay. I think Mike was next, and then Lucy. Hi, Mike.
Hi. I work for Transition Together, and we support the transition movement, which is 300 groups working at community level throughout the UK. And yeah, it's going to kind of respond to like quite a few things. I come to Slate, so I had loads of meetings today. I'm actually trying to write a systems thinking guide for community groups today. So
wow.
Right.
Which will be hopefully out in the next couple of, well, by the end of the year.
Look forward to seeing that.
Yeah. So because I've been involved in, I've been involved in community activism since I was 17 in the unemployed centres, community resource centres, that was set up in the at the end of the 80s and early 90s. So I've been through all of it, homelessness, charities, and then working for transition. And I suppose the thing that why I think local action is important is because it kind of depends how you look at systems, because if that you've got lots of the same thing happening rather than scaling up and a group getting bigger, but you're scaling across and there's lots of groups like popping up everywhere, then it becomes kind of a social movement in a way, even if it's not connected, though we'd like to make it more connected in relation to transition and other movements connecting in with transition. And the way I kind of look at it is that analogy of, like, you know, the pond, where you have the pond with a dominant species, and the current dominant species in our pond is like horrible neoliberal capitalism siphoning out all the goodness and wealth and etc. But at the same time, we've got kind of like, you know, you can look at these things as kind of like antibodies to that, or you know, like frog spawn, which is beginning to get more and more dominant in that pond. And it feels to me like I see a lot of stuff through the transition movement, as well as through this other projects I'm involved in, Control Shift, where we actually are seeing, I think, the beginnings of a new way of doing stuff in lots of different ways. It's currently emerging, like you know, you talked a bit about how you have different stages in history, and you have, like, you know, feudalism and mercantilism and then capitalism, and I feel like we are moving to something slightly different. At the same time, there's also lots of more nebulous movements doing the same thing, which is going to be interesting to see how that plays out, particularly with the far right and that sort of stuff. But the thing I think is important is when we were talking about the economy being embedded in society, I actually think the economy is embedded in people's consciousness to the point, like, I mean, I always will go back to Eric Fromm's book, The Sane Society, where he talks about the capitalist consciousness. It's like, at the moment, we're still very much in that, but there's also lots of people who are beginning to change or think differently. And I think that's what these movements are also doing. So they're enabling a shift in how people view what's going on around them. And actually a lot of that is related to the local, because the local is where you live. Okay, we've got these like technological communities that we're also in, but we also live in the local.
Yeah.
And one of the interesting things is how even uber capitalists still have to live in a community, unless they're mega rich and got gated ones. But they're still in a community. So that's why the community level is so important, because we all exist in communities.
Yeah.
So when you have that engagement with these local movements, there is this like change that can happen, I think. And the thing with what I'm seeing with transition groups is that the responses to a lot of the problems that we face are really small responses. You need a complexity and a multitude of responses to deal with climate change. You can't just go, here's one big solution. We need thousands and thousands of little solutions which are relevant to small areas, and they're different in each area. And so you can't do that unless you've got communities who know what the solutions are, being able to do that. And again, it points to the thing of like, where the city almost being the good level, because you can do something, and two, the people who make decisions actually live near you, so you can actually go to houses.
You to round up, because we got a few.
Sorry. So that's
all right, Mike. Carry on. Yeah.
I would say that's the kind of the thing, and if you look at the way that change, Joanna Macy talks about change happening. She talks about stopping damage, shifting consciousness, and creating the new world. And I think that the small thing is very much about creating a new world in the shell of the old. And I think that's why it's super important. And I stop there.
Oh, thanks.
Sorry,
Lucy, I had you down. That's all right. Well, you have a lot of experience.
I took my hand down and I just wrote it in the chat, but I just wanted to add that apart from local democracy, also the universal basic income kind of links to community action, Sheila, because I mean, just because it enables people to do the work that's often unpaid, it frees up that time and space.
Yeah, sure.
That valuable work that's being done, caring as well, and all those other kind of unpaid things. But yeah. Thank you so much for your presentation.
Yeah, and we had James. Thank you, Lucy. You with us, James?
Okay, yeah. Okay, the network's a bit unstable. Just the topic of whole groups of people, whole groups of activists. It's true in some aspects, but in general elections, you see that hundreds of thousands, millions, like tens of millions of people tend to vote for their political party. So there are times when you can get out of your bubble and relate to the movements and demographics of people.
Yeah, so if I get you right, James, you're saying that sometimes you need big action as well.
I mean, you do during election times, you get people voting in mass numbers, which is like suffragettes who are responsible.
Yeah, I think the quote, the Margaret Mead quote, the first half of it we're all happy with. The second bit, it's the only thing that ever did, is not true.
We've come to a compromise.
Yes. Yes, that's right.
Yeah, I think that's a good place, actually, probably to end our discussion of smallness, because it's not just about smallness in itself, is it? It's about the relationships of size and also speed, as we've heard. But I think thanks very much, Sheila, because I think you've done a great job there of reminding us about the importance of that kind of ecosystem of action and how we need to enable it and nurture it more. And you know, we've also had points about how local democracy can help that, but also how sometimes we just need to get out and make sure that at least the wider landscape of who's elected is the least worst option. Let me put it that way.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you so much, everyone, for coming along. Let me just point out that we have a follow-up session to this on the 30th of April, to which you are warmly invited. And that also happens at 2 o'clock and goes on till about 5:30-ish. And we're going to hear from one of our partners, Green Dependent, about the work that they've been doing that relates to the question of smallness and the economy and energy systems, etc. So we're looking forward to hearing from them in Hungary, but also they're involved in various European. Hi, Adina. Adina's going to talk to us about that on the 30th. And Ian's also preparing something about agile small technology and the issues around, you know, as we know, we need to be adaptive to changing conditions and not get stuck in massive infrastructure path dependency. Is this going to usher in a new sort of era of small, potentially more agile technology? Is that a correct? Yeah.
Roughly right. Yeah, which is
roughly right. Well, why don't you say what you're going to do, and then I'll ask Adina, because
no, well, it is to explore that issue that we have, that we've created massive systems which have massive momentum to keep going. What's the reaction to that we need for dealing with the changes that are coming, which are rapid and unpredictable? So it's that tension between those two that I want to explore. Thanks.
Thank you. And Adina, would you like to say a few words? Okay, I think we can hear you now.
Yeah, okay, sorry, I just lost all the sound. So I couldn't hear you, but it's back. So hello, everyone. I'll be talking about how smallness is supported or not supported by all kinds of energy citizenship initiatives that we have looked at in Europe from all kinds of countries, including Hungary, but also Western and Southern European countries. And I will also be looking at how people, citizens, ordinary citizens, so maybe they are not even identify themselves as green, view smallness and all kinds of lifestyle options that are related to smallness. Are they ready to do them? Do they accept them? If they don't accept them, why not? And can they find solutions or a context in which they accept them? So yeah, I work on the border between research and action. So my talk will be a bit like that as well, combining research and action.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And we really look forward to that. So we hope we'll see you all again on the 30th. Okay. Bye-bye, everyone. Bye.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Take care. Bye.